Good morning. Thank you for coming today. Welcome to this presentation on the Fluidity economic system. I'm in transit today, so I'm presenting this talk to you as a recording. There'll be an email address at the end and social media links for any questions that haven't been answered in the Q&A. The Fluidity system I'm going to present today was born from a study of ecosystems in nature. These natural ecosystems are complex, benevolent, and yet they include healthy competition and a struggle for success. Most intelligent people are aware of the need for systemic change in our economic system. But rather than try and come up with the best solution on our own, why not copy the features of natural systems? After all, nature has been engaged in research and development for 3.8 billion years. At the same time, by following this approach, we find some unexpected benefits. The kind of circular economy we're looking for represents exactly the kind of resource cycling we see in nature. And so it makes sense that by applying these principles, we will find the most direct or possibly elegant path to circularity, the circular economy. In the book Cradle to Cradle, Michael Braungart and William McDonough write, imagine you've been given the assignment of designing the Industrial Revolution retrospectively. With respect to its negative consequences, the assignment would have to read something like this. Create a system of production that puts billions of pounds of toxic material into the air, water and soil every year. Produces some materials so dangerous they will require constant vigilance by future generations. Results in gigantic amounts of waste. Puts valuable materials in holes all over the planet where they can never be retrieved. Requires thousands of complex regulations, not to keep people and natural systems safe, but rather to keep them from being poisoned too quickly. Measures productivity by how few people are working. Creates prosperity by digging up or cutting down natural resources and then burying or burning them. And erases the diversity of species and cultural practices. So yes, unequivocally, the circular economy is needed. It will be achieved through the transformation of GDP, and fluidity is a method to achieve that. We live in a world of finite resources, yet we have the technologies and intelligence to achieve circularity. There are challenges on this path, of course. These can be seen as opportunities, and they can be addressed through an intelligent economic system, because the economic system is the largest man-made system that we all share. It does not have to be an obstacle to change. In fact, it can be an engine for positive change, perhaps the most powerful engine of all. And so in asking what an intelligent economic system looks like, I would like to take the following design approach with you. Select the outcomes we most want, and then design backwards to the present. So, we need a large-scale replacement of the economic status quo. But this does not mean the best solution is simply to throw away the current system. In fact, we are all tied into the status quo for our livelihoods and well-being. Therefore, critically, it needs to be transformed, not replaced. Existing currencies and the economic systems they underwrite need to undergo a sea change, but this can only be done while maintaining or increasing the strength and scope of the economy. The reason for this is that we are unwilling to shift to practices that bring us lower income, understandably. So there are two goals, and they must both be realized. The first, stabilize and strengthen the economy. The second, achieve the circular economy by transformation of GDP. Why transformation of GDP? Because currently the most destructive and unsustainable practices appear on the same balance sheet as the most sustainable and beneficial ones. GDP measures activity, not benefit. For example, in 1990, the Exxon Valdez oil spill actually created an increase in GDP in the Prince William Sound area because so many people were coming in to clean up the spill. So we urgently need to transform GDP. Transform GDP and you achieve circularity. Transform the currency and you transform the economy. An economy using a currency is a complex system that obeys specific rules, written and unwritten rules. For this reason, its everyday outcomes can be predicted. Because they can be predicted, they can be preempted. Because they can be preempted, they can be improved upon. And it is because we need to transform, not replace the current system, that we need a new kind of system that piggybacks onto the current one and steers it to intelligent outcomes, giving us some kind of hybrid system. So let's give the economy a brain. What kind of brain? Nature achieves the biggest change by working on a very small scale and then scaling up that solution millions of times. This is an observable principle you see in the natural world. It leads to extremely compact and elegant solutions. For example, the lung of an animal, nutrient transfer through the roots of a tree, or the way that tiny creeks collect rainwater and together form a massive river. This is a principle of fractals, and it is everywhere in the natural world. We can benefit further from this principle by redesigning our economic systems to incorporate it. What's the smallest process in an economy? It's the single transaction. So let's change the nature of that transaction with our hybrid system according to our end goals of a circular economy. Briefly, before we transform the current system, let's consider how we got here. The current economic system evolved over centuries. It has not been cohesively designed to meet our needs today and into the future. It has been added to on a piecemeal or patchwork basis. And the various conditions it was designed for are no longer relevant. That doesn't sound like a good design approach to me. The current economy doesn't make use of modern technology in a truly effective way. Instead, it tacks modern systems onto what is an outdated system as a whole, based on assumptions that are out of date. There's no reason that we need to leave things as they are. The enabling technologies now available to us and central to the intelligent economy are the internet, mobile communications platforms, digital transactions, and big data. Because of these platforms, there's something we can do today that was never possible before, and that is to create a purely digital currency, whereby transactions can occur online via swipe cards or using your tablet or mobile phone. In the context of a hybrid digital currency, we can incentivize the flow of money, regular money, in the economy, and thus strengthen the economy. And because it's digital, we can adjust these incentives on a daily basis or even an hourly basis. The fact that there's no physical money means there's no risk of counterfeit. And the data that this currency provides will give us a better understanding of the new currency and in fact the regular currency than we have ever had before to date. We will be able to understand this currency's dynamics and the behavior behind it through the lens of the intelligent and sustainable economy. Because this currency can and should be limited to transactions that have an above average effect on achieving the circular economy, what we can call circularity, it becomes an entirely benevolent currency. This single dynamic will create knock-on effects that become unstoppable momentum because it makes people richer for doing the right thing, even in the short term. So let's just look at this in terms of motivations for a minute. Why do people spend money? Why do you not spend money? Why do you make any decision? For any choice that we make, we have incentives in one direction and incentives in another. It's the net balance of these incentives that determines the option we choose. So this can be called the decision-making landscape. As seen earlier, because our decisions follow predictable patterns in this regard, it's possible to use the fluidity system to positively shift the balance of incentives towards more sustainable choices. In other words, we make it in people's short-term interests to make those decisions that favor their long-term interests and the long-term interests of every other being alive on the planet. This can apply not just to the circular economy and environmental sustainability, but also to environmental justice and social cohesion. It's by lowering barriers to the kinds of transactions that benefit the greater good that the number and scale of these transactions will increase. This system transforms outcomes, systems, behaviors, and even norms and expectations, given enough time. It will catch the imagination of participants, especially as they get the hang of the new system, and they themselves will accelerate change in ways that, as developers, we cannot even imagine. 7 million heads are better than one. So far we've come to the conclusion, or at least I have, about the need for a hybrid currency. And we've talked about using a digital currency tied to the national currency to adjust economic flows towards the circular economy. So let's drill down a little bit on the individual transaction. Each transaction under the fluidity system has two components: digital currency and national currency. The one gears into the other. So we can talk about a gearing ratio for any transaction within the system. So if this ratio is 1:9, that's 1 fluidity credit to 9 national currency units. Under the fluidity system, the gearing ratio is set by the merchant or the service provider. Let's call them the seller. This dynamic encourages innovation and development of best practices by creating a game-like ecosystem. The gearing ratio allows sellers to incentivize the sale of certain products and services. And remember that only products and services that embody above average circularity are included at all. Also remember, you don't have to achieve circularity all at once. It's a process of transformation. So, simply favoring transactions that represent above average circularity raises the bar. The average goes up, and so the movement to circularity also increases because the minimum requirement for participation also increases. Sellers are incentivized to participate because entrepreneurs among them will see ways to increase profit in hard cash, national currency, by reducing the cash cost of a product to buyers, which is offset by the credit cost. And this whether it's achieved through bulk buys, promotions, loss leaders, or other innovative ways. And to start with, buyers will have received credits at little or no cost and via any Fluidity sales that they themselves have made. So everyone gets to play. There's something else we can do with a digital currency you can't do with a traditional currency. And that's to introduce a quantum leap into each and every transaction. What do I mean by this? Okay, so usually when you buy something, if you pay £10, the seller receives £10. But with Fluidity, you could pay 10 credits and the seller could receive 11 credits. The extra credit has been auto-generated in the transaction. The extra credit rewards use of the system and incentivizes buyers to take up products and services. So here is another way to accelerate and adjust circularity. This feature of Fluidity is called accumulation. The accumulation ratio is set by the accrediting agency. This factor allows the right amount of control over the system. So just to recap, the gearing ratio is set by the seller and the accumulation ratio is set by the agency. Taken together, this means there is a lot of room for interplay between buyers, sellers, and the agency. Room to adjust ratios, room for feedback and crowdsourcing innovation, room for development of best practices and then improvement of those practices. And all the time momentum is building, behaviors are shifting, the economy is growing, even while it moves towards circularity and sustainable GDP. Very busy, just like an ecosystem. One principle of systems in general is that the larger an efficient system is, the more synergies there are, beyond some, and the more that these synergies amplify upon themselves to create even more beyond some gains. The point I'd like to make here is if this can be achieved by one region or sector, it can be achieved by others. If it can be achieved by one country, it can be achieved by others, even if the solutions look a little different from place to place. In terms of engineering circular economy outcomes, there is another feature that we can introduce, another dimension to improve the decision-making landscape. Regarding the strength of the economy, money is often more valuable the faster that it circulates. We saw that in the wake of the Great Recession. The money was still in the system, but people were not moving it. Panic, fear, all these psychological checks on the fluid movement of the economy kicked in. And the value of spending one unit of currency within the economy varies in other ways, according to what it's spent on, where it's spent, when it's spent, who spends it, and how fast it's cycling, its velocity, if you like. So, in order to incentivize spending of credits, and with them national currency, Fluidity includes a feature where credits lose some of their value if they're not spent within a certain time period. This feature, called evaporation, can also be controlled very precisely according to a curve of decreasing value. Like other parameters, it can be adjusted by sector, region, and time. And so the number of adjustable parameters, in combination with the choices available to the participant, provide a method to shift the economy transaction by transaction and day by day closer and closer to circularity and to true sustainability, economic, social, and environmental. Welcome to the intelligent economy. And so credits flow onwards and onwards, stimulating further movement of national currency, changing GDP, changing behaviors and outcomes, from one sector to the next, improving the circularity of the supply chain, positively affecting behavior both directly and indirectly. Directly because more credits are allocated to those who provide a more positive influence on circularity, and indirectly because participants understand the changes in behaviors that lead to greater wealth, and they preemptively change their behaviors in response. So by these dynamics, we have aligned short-term actions with long-term outcomes, overcoming what has been an absolutely critical limiting factor in human behavior today. Fluidity provides multiple data points from every transaction. Taken together, that's a potentially vast number. Some of these data points are not just read-only. They actually provide millions of tiny levers to fine-tune change in the desired direction. It's like until now we have been wearing oven mitts in the dark, handling the economy fearfully, only picking it up once every few months. Suddenly the lights are on, the mitts are off, and we can actually see what we're doing. For the first time, we have an intelligent handle on the economy, and we're able to steer it towards intelligent outcomes every single day. The data are anonymized from each transaction within the system. The massive number of data are of very high value to sellers using Fluidity. That's the point I'd like to underline. Actually, they are very high value to the market as a whole. And therefore, these data can be used to incentivize some very interesting and unusual business behavior. Some sellers will be better than others at using Fluidity to generate higher cash revenues and profitability. The Fluidity ecosystem facilitates their development of best practices. These sellers will be even more successful if they can access the anonymous data that the system provides, allowing very detailed analysis of the marketplace and buyer behavior that's never been available before. From the perspective of a seller using Fluidity to increase income, the value of the new data easily outweighs the desire to keep their best practices to themselves, which means they are incentivized to share them. Those best practices can be shared with other sellers using the system in exchange for the anonymous data. What this means is the good get better and the best get even better. Everything becomes leaner and greener. The whole economy becomes more competitive, more sustainable, and more fluid. Because we have all heard the argument that sustainability is just too expensive to justify. Fluidity removes this excuse by providing the extra wealth to underwrite the transition to the circular economy and sustainable GDP. So let's take a short break from all the technical stuff and consider what we're trying to do here with money and resources and our everyday lifestyle. Let's just ask a simple question. What is wealth? Think about it. What is wealth? If we define wealth as the ability to access the things you need, what we can see is that Fluidity partially and beneficially decouples wealth from income. It provides more resources to participants with no necessary net change in income. It's true that some sellers may experience a temporary drop in their national currency income when they start using Fluidity, as they look for ways to make more national currency later. But this is balanced by the fact that they will have credits to spare and to spend. And as these individuals learn how to make Fluidity work for them, they increase their national currency income up to the point it was at before they began using Fluidity. This is a critical moment. This moment is called revenue plus one, or rev plus one. The new upward momentum then means their income keeps going past this point, and now they have all the credits, all the credit wealth in addition. So that's the perspective. This is the nutshell of the transformation of GDP towards a circular economy, this graph right here. You imagine this happening, this moment of rev plus one for an individual participant. But now, step back, this is where we scale up. Each instance of rev plus one is but one pixel in a much larger picture. And that picture is GDP plus one. Higher GDP than before the Fluidity system began to be used. Because as more and more participants achieve rev plus one, GDP rises above where it was. We are making people richer and improving circularity at the same time, and the momentum just keeps going. People get better and better at this, as they always do in a game like ecosystem. On the bottom right of this graph, you see a line for eco-social allocations and adjustments. What does that mean? Eco-social means circularity plus other sustainable economic, environmental, and social goals. As Fluidity reaches scale, you can start making larger allocations of credits to individuals and organizations that are pushing the envelope for the circular economy. The system size allows for that, and this further accelerates the pace of desired, intelligent change. And all other parameters, of course, can be adjusted to the same goal. And so in time, wealth and transformed GDP converge. And we are left with GDP as a metric that can be used without harm for an infinite number of generations. Over time, as actors in the system develop, there will be greater and greater sophistication and responsiveness. This is also true for best practices. Fluidity becomes a more and more powerful engine to change. Everything interacts with everything else. And each variable is another dimension in facilitating change. The human brain, we know, can remember 7 things at once, and sometimes not even that. Advanced algorithms don't have that limitation at all. The Fluidity algorithm works in the same way that an ecosystem model does. You plug in the outcomes you want. You program the algorithm according to your best guess causes and effects. Then you run the model, test the output, and adjust the model to get closer to the desired outcomes. And you keep doing that. You keep refining the model. You keep refining the algorithm. So by incorporating feedback loops into the system as self-learning components, it becomes better and better at shepherding the economy towards circularity. Not only that, as the number of participants, buyers, sellers, and transactions increases, their individual ability to make the system work for them increases. The engine of change becomes more powerful. And incidentally, they are happier. Money becomes a more enjoyable thing to be engaged with. Only good practices are favored. So here's what we're left with. So here's what I propose. Click on the social media links I'll show you in a minute, and you can also find these links on the Fluidity YouTube channel page and other social media sites. Check out more information on Fluidity. Email me with any further questions you have, apart from the Q&A. Make fluidity a point of discussion in your community, business or sector. Write to your government representatives asking them to adopt fluidity or at least look at it. And if you are in a position of influence, please consider which sector, region or country you could help bring fluidity to, and then email me. Also, please send me an email to receive newsletters with progress of fluidity worldwide. We're now at the end of the presentation. In a minute we'll move on to questions. If you have any questions that aren't covered, please email them to fluidityeconomic@gmail.com. That's fluidityeconomic@gmail.com. Questions are coming up. Before then, let's take a 30-second pause to stretch our virtual legs. Okay, welcome back. Because today's session is recorded, I'm going to answer the questions that have been most frequently asked so far about fluidity. On screen now are the social media links to allow you to stay in touch with fluidity. I'll just give you a moment to check those out. Please share these links with anyone in your network who may be interested. If you email me a question, I'll reply personally, and if they're general questions, I'll also post them to the blog fluidityeconomic.blogspot.co.uk, unless you don't want me to, in which case let me know. Okay, so the first question is, how do you make people adopt fluidity? You don't. For any region or sector, participation is voluntary. There is a communications campaign in each case that lays out the case for participation, addresses questions and concerns, and initiates the system in such a way that there is a steady increase of interest. That's very important. Proof of concept is powerful. Successful participants become wealthier and successful sellers will have more business. So if it's done right, it becomes impossible not to participate for economic reasons. And all of that drives the behavioral change towards circularity and other aspects of sustainability. Question number 2. Can you explain accumulation again? Are you creating money out of thin air? What we're creating out of thin air is an incentive to improve the economy, in the same way that the banks currently create what we think of as money out of thin air when they agree to loan you money. But every single fluidity credit has one or more multiple ecological, social and economic benefits. So it's an intelligent and benevolent version of what's already being done. Question number 3. What incentives do sellers have to participate? It looks like they receive less cash income because they have to allow their customers to pay for part of the purchase in credits. Firstly, sellers have the option of putting up prices if they're concerned about taking a hit in earnings. Secondly, they themselves choose which products and services to include, provided these are aligned with greater circularity and other positive outcomes. Thirdly, participation is optional. Only sellers who feel they can use the system to leverage greater profit will participate. Entrepreneurial ones will see competitive opportunities that others miss. Those developing and implementing best practices will become more successful. Fluidity includes an inbuilt mechanism also for sharing these best practices through providing the anonymized data. And that complexity of that data, the specificity of it, has just not been available before. So fluidity leads to an economy that's more competitive and adaptable. And apart from being more sustainable, it's also more compassionate. Question number 4. What about taxes? What incentivizes government to participate? Well, this question is essentially the same as the one above. There may be a temporary dip in tax revenue up to several months as the economy adjusts and people get used to the new system and develop new ways to increase their net income before credits. But the sharing of best practices means that all actors who choose to participate have the ability to increase their performance, even as they shift towards circularity. So consider an individual participant. This person learns how to use fluidity to increase their cash income to at least the level at which it was when they began participating. But now they have also the flowing and accumulating credits at their disposal. Holding these credits means that this person has another incentive to keep increasing their wealth through intelligent use of them, which means their cash or national currency income also keeps increasing, provided they make basically sensible choices. But also remember, this person is one of millions. So as this phenomenon occurs for everyone involved in every organization, GDP increases way beyond the level it was at before the system was applied, even while it's being transformed into a metric that suits the scenario of limited resources that exists on planet Earth. So I just remind you that the core incentive for any person or organization to participate in fluidity is to increase their wealth in terms of national currency. We're talking about enlightened self-interest here. And everyone is aligned and their efforts support each other, guided by goals of circularity and social sustainability. As this happens, the tax base expands. Not only that, the economic expansion is truly sustainable because you have all of these levers on to change. Overheating, even in the conventional economy, can thus be controlled when fluidity has enough interface points. Quite apart from the fluidity system, this provides confidence in the growth of markets and could help us escape this cycle of boom-bust, which is basically founded on a lack of data and a lack of sensitive data. Furthermore, when fluidity gets big enough, government can pay a portion of public sector wages in credits. Well, that's a huge saving for them, and thus it becomes very attractive for government participation. Question number 5. What about inflation? Will inflation increase? Credit inflation per se won't increase. But let's look at this in more detail. What will happen is that for different countries and different scenarios, fluidity credits will find their right level in the specific context of the ecosystem of actors and interactions. It will adjust to this level and stabilize, even if there is some shift up and down, which of course there will be, because there are different forces pulling on the credit value, and these forces will keep that value in dynamic balance until some new factor from outside or purposefully introduced in order to speed up circularity or other beneficial outcomes affects the relative credit value. So in this gamification scenario, people will be spending a lot of attention on the value of credits and on what happens next. So it will all be very participatory. As for inflation in a traditional sense, the risk is not great when you have so many levers on economic flow. In fact, it should be possible to exert greater control over inflation than without fluidity. What kind of scaling up are we talking about in terms of our ability to carefully manage the economy? It's vast. We have an exponentially more control over the economy. And so this stabilization of the economy can in fact be one of our eco-social goals, provided the economic transformation is also guaranteed and unstoppable. So the economy becomes a carefully monitored thing according to scientific conditions, impeccable ecological and humanitarian principles on the part of those with the highest good of everyone in mind. Just a couple more questions now. The sixth question: can you explain Rev plus one and the slide called Threading the Needle? Okay, I think this is slide number 22, but don't quote me on that. As a seller, when you start using the Fluidity system, it's possible that you experience a temporary dip, as we've seen. As you start to leverage your use of earned credits and improve your practices, this dip is reversed. So now you have more national currency and more credits to spend. You're wealthier from all perspectives, including an environmental one. So this moment at which you pass your previous or baseline level of regular income is called revenue plus one, Rev plus one. As more and more people achieve Rev plus one, GDP increases, and momentum is then seriously underway towards a circular economy. So Fluidity, you can see it as an investment that pays off both in the short term and forever after that. Next question: how do you start Fluidity? The goal in starting a Fluidity system is to trigger cascading credits and snowballing of interest in the system and use of the system. So a specific starter motor, which I won't get into now, has been developed. But it basically employs and incentivizes use of the specific kinds of credit spend that most people will want to get their hands on. Where has Fluidity been developed, or is being developed? I first presented Fluidity as a paper in July 2014 at the Association for Heterodox Economics Conference in Greenwich, and since then I've been in communication with various policy agencies, sustainability, government agencies, and local currency representatives in different countries. So what I can tell you is that various pilot projects are under discussion. And the final question: what is the name of the Fluidity currency? I have named the currency Luka, L-U-K-A. Reason being, it's a two-syllable word that can be pronounced in most languages of the world. And as a final aside, in the developing world, where the technology is simpler in terms of transaction, Fluidity forms 100% of the transaction, and the credits are spent using using SMS platforms that are already in use in Kenya, for example. These transactions, these Fluidity transactions, are only available if you make certain other transactions in the national currency economy. Okay, that's all the questions. That's the end of our session. Thank you very much for tuning in. As I say, email me if there are any other questions, and stay in touch.